Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever in the world you are today. I am Alexandria, and this is my co-host, Jasleen. We are the co-founders of The Disruptors. If you don't know who we are a job board that supports people from underrepresented communities to get matched with tech jobs that they can thrive in. So companies that are prioritizing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we are here to help both sides. The company side, get better at diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the employee side, how to actually get jobs in companies that you can thrive in and how you would know if you saw it. Today's topic is for employers, how to hire for culture add, not culture fit. And we are going to define what that looks like. A little bit about my background. I was a therapist, pivoted into tech, started coaching to bridge the two worlds, and saw an issue with the two sides not talking to one another. We can solve these problems together, and that's why we're here. Jasleen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jasleen, and if you're new here, I am an ICF certified coach like Alexandria, and I specialize in career leadership and now as co-founder of The Disruptors, DEI, and I'm super excited about this topic. Alexandria and I have had a lot of conversations offline on this, and actually some really good discourse around this topic because there are a lot of benefits when we look at culture. And so the key here is that we're not moving away from culture. We're paying attention to it and looking at it from a different lens, from a DEI lens, because I think that's where we really have gotten lost in terms of the culture fit model that we are trying to move away from. And so it's important first for us to really define what is culture. And so really these are the behaviors, they're the norms, the politics that sometimes we hate, the values, the beliefs, the corporate lingo. So language is something even to really pay attention when it comes to assessing culture, because historically there has been an appropriate way of speaking in the workplace. And so if you are an immigrant, if you subscribe to AAVE, or in other words, Black vernacular, this is something that there is a lot of bias around, and really we're not trying to assimilate. We are trying to find the value in all cultures and make it so that people can show up to work whole and authentic. And so that is the heart of what we're doing. And so culture is important. Hiring for culture is important, but there is a right and wrong way of doing that. And so we're going to walk you through that.
Yeah. Before we dive into that, I would love to hear from who is here, letting us know where in the world you are, because that's always interesting. And if you have thoughts on what do you think the difference between culture fit and culture add is, you can drop it in the comments. We would love to hear from you. Jasleen, do you want to start with the definition, or even not necessarily, because you kind of defined what culture is, but the culture fit and the whole movement around hiring for culture fit, and what was the intention, and then what are we seeing as the impact?
So there were really good intentions around culture fit because we want to increase engagement. We want to increase retention and productivity, collaboration. And these things are always easier when people really subscribe to the organizational culture, right? There's a lot of benefit to that. Yeah. And so in the past, however, where the problem has been is that it's been really feelings-based. It's been riddled with bias. It's been, it's more the similar to me effect, or what I've even still, to this day, I hear recruiters and hiring managers talking about the beer test. Would I go for a beer with this person? That's culture fit. That's really, it wasn't the intention. The intention was good, but that's kind of what it's moved toward.
Well, because it's the implementation, right? And how do you implement finding somebody who is a culture fit, right? You want to assess the values, the behaviors, and the ways of thinking that you're bringing into the company. You want to know what's coming in and is it going to mesh well? But whole thing of the culture fit being what exists right now and the stagnation element of culture fit versus culture add, which is somebody who is going to bring in influence and perspectives and newness that will get you to where your vision says you're trying to go. Like if you're just doing fit, it's what we are right now, the norms, and it could even be there's company norms, but then there's team norms and there's individual cultures within teams that then get hired for, and the stagnation and just the boxes that can be created that way versus looking at the organizational values. What is the mission and the vision, and who do we need to help us get there? Because what got you to where you are isn't going to get you to where you're going. You got to have the innovation come in.
Those boxes, that metaphor really resonates for me because culture fit is really generalized, is oversimplified, and it's individualized. Right. And so we're not looking at it, like you said, in the broader context of where the organization is going, the value that the organization brings to its customers and its stakeholders, and really understanding, okay, what are the deliberate values, but also recognizing there are values outside of the corporate values that are still going to benefit you.
Yes.
Right. And so one of the things that I really pay attention to, I have all my clients do this and teams as well, is do the VIA character strength survey. So those are about strengths, but VIA stands for values in action. So it's really looking at all of the values. And if you look through that list, some of those values might not be your corporate values, and that is okay. That is okay. You don't want to overcomplicate your corporate values. But employees bringing all of these other sets of values, all of those are going to benefit. All of those are going to benefit. They're all strengths to your organization and can be used in different ways, and assess the gaps within your organization. Because if we're not looking at the gaps, if we're not adding to what already exists, you are only you're going to create a homogeneous workforce, which again is like
That's
it's the opposite of diversity, right? It's the opposite of diversity. And so we're not saying scrap culture, it's culture and diversity and new ways of thinking, new ideas. But within that set of corporate values, we're still going to be focusing on that.
Well, and like the homogeneous piece, right? And you're bringing in people who look like you, talk like you, think like you, have the same background as you, right? The affinity bias shows up huge here. Oh, they went to the same school as me. They must be this. Oh, they also rock climb. They must be this. Oh, they are a part of the same social club as me. They must think like this. And you see yourself in the person across the table from you, but that's your own bias and mirror showing up. You don't actually know if the person across from you holds those same values or thought processes. And so being able to evaluate differently in what you're looking for, right? So the question, what do you like to do for fun? That's looking for culture fit, right? That's introducing the affinity bias versus tell me about a time when you had a conflict with a coworker and how you handled it. That tells you how they're thinking, how their emotional intelligence shows up, and how they would process in the actual workplace. And having that standardization of questions that you're asking everybody, so that you're not having different assessments for different people that are coming in. But back to the culture thing specifically, why should leaders pay attention to culture?
I mean, we've said it. It's really about the engagement, the retention. You don't want someone who doesn't believe in the values of the organization. You also want to be paying attention to cultural differences that need to be explored and managed and facilitated. I don't like the word managed, but like facilitated in a way that we are unleashing the potential of the organization and thinking about it in new ways. Because going back again, because if you're thinking about culture fit, like the beer test, like would I go for a beer with this person? This person might not even drink beer. This person might introduce you to a drink, maybe a Negroni Spagliato, stunning, right? They might introduce you to a new drink or a new way of hanging out that isn't something you've done before. And so the same goes with what you're doing in your business.
Mm-hmm.
They might know a specific demographic that
Mm-hmm.
you don't know very well, right?
Mm-hmm.
They might know a way of problem solving that you don't know. They might have, like, depending on their skills and whether they might not have gone to the same type of schools as you. They might not even speak the same languages as you. That can really help you get into new markets, new ways of thinking, and solving the problems that your organization is facing today, because you're not going to solve those problems with the same type of thinking. So we need to pay attention to culture, the culture that we're operating in, the nuance of culture in our world, and our ever increasing globalization. Like, this is the time to really focus on this, because the organizations that do are going to be the organizations that can pivot and that can see what's coming and understand these issues on a global level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that all of that is 100%. Like, knowing, we can only know what we know, right? We can't really see past our own noses, our own thoughts, our own processes, our own solutions. And if you have that group think situation, you're not even seeing all the opportunities that are possible. You aren't seeing what's coming around the corner. You aren't seeing where you need to go. And you're potentially not seeing a giant hole in the road that somebody else could see. And one of the things that we see in tech a lot is, oh, they don't have tech experience, so I can't hire them. Like, you're putting yourself into a pigeonhole and potentially shooting yourself in the foot, because people from other industries may have knowledge and processes and procedures that are beneficial to supporting how tech can grow and be innovative and try something different than what they have. If we take it as an assembly line example, right? If you're in that culture fit and that stagnation, you say, okay, it takes 10 people to build one car in 20 hours. So if we have 20 people, we can build 2 cars in this. But if you bring somebody in who's like, hey, did you know if you turn this screw differently this way, you can cut your time down in half? But if you don't allow those people into your organization, you're not going to get that innovation. You're not going to get that effectiveness or the brainstorming or the creativity that comes with new. I think that people often forget the benefit of change because change is so scary for so many people, but that's where growth is. That's where the change happens. And tech is always changing and always growing. So how do we keep that moving forward?
And I want to emphasize, like, we're not moving away from skill-based hiring either, right? So it's it's moving away from maybe hiring from specific schools or requiring a specific degree, but it's the skills that really matter, right? And so in assessing for culture add, because even when we do our work to remove bias, there's still going to be a lot of bias when it comes to that. And so we want to think of more concrete ways of focusing on skills as well, but also the bonus of what culture add does this person bring. And so it's really the icing on top, and looking at your organization as a whole to say, what demographics might we be missing because we're focusing so much on culture? And you might not even have culture. Like, you might say, oh, I'm not hiring for culture fit because we don't have culture questions on our interview. But if you've watched any of our series on bias, or if you've downloaded our bias checklist, you'll know that the bias is very much tied to culture, because it's tied to your core beliefs. It's tied to the behaviors. It's tied to the language, the norms, all of that. And even the politics, because I can say, as a first generation Canadian, or if you're first generation American, you don't understand the corporate politics, because you're probably the first person in your family to be in the corporate world. And so even if you're working at a startup, there are a lot of these, and I think it's to the point of that culture is passed down from generation to generation. So we've had this corporate culture that is passed down from generation to generation. And so the people who weren't part of that are going to be disadvantaged when it comes to catering to your biases.
Which I think pushing that into the thought of companies, if there is a culture issue, it's coming from the top down. It's been passed down, it's been ingrained, and it's going to take time if you're trying to adjust it. And a thing that comes to mind too is when you're thinking about your company culture, being very aware of what you say your company culture is and what your company culture actually is.
Yes.
Right? If you're talking about, oh, work-life balance is super, super important. I worked for a company that they said that all the time. Work-life balance, it's really important. Take your time off. We have unlimited PTO. But they didn't support that. There was no way that you could actually take your time off without checking your email, without being engaged, because there was no redundancy. They were running so lean that there wasn't anybody to do your job while you were gone. Therefore, you didn't actually get to not be there. And or you were just inundated with 300, 400, 500 emails when you returned to work, and any relaxation you maybe had from taking your vacation is now gone the moment you come back to work.
Yeah.
And so there's the touted culture, and then there's the actual culture.
Yeah. And if you're watching this and you're part of a startup and you say, well, we didn't have generations of people, we are new.
Mm-hmm.
You're still recruiting talent from those corporations. You may have left those corporations. So speaking as someone who left the corporate world, I am still unlearning some of these things that were ingrained in me as this is how it's supposed to be. These are the politics. And so when I'm coaching my clients, a lot of the time it's a balancing act of being like, okay, this is the culture. This is the patriarchal culture. And so there's a set of rules in the patriarchal culture. There are the norms, the politics, and like a lot of them are very invisible. Right. And so they're less invisible to the people who are part of those demographics because they were raised in that culture. But for people who weren't, they're completely invisible. They were invisible to me for a long time. And so, you know, with my psychology background and studying all of these kind of gender studies and race studies, it's clear in the data that some of these norms that we've established don't actually produce better results. Yeah. And so it's really putting that DEI lens on things to say, why are we doing things this way? How might we do it a different way? How can we really challenge the status quo? And so if you're a leader of a startup, it can be so overwhelming and you're bringing in all these experts from different fields, but really you have to like build up a muscle to kind of challenge people in thinking of new ways of doing things. Because yes, this has worked for them in the past, but the world is changing. Our customers are changing. The stakeholders, what they're interested in, the investors, what they're interested in, it's changing. It's moving from a profit-only model to really looking at people and the planet. And so as these things are changing, we also need to change.
Absolutely. And I like what you just pointed out there in the environment of work is changing, needs to change, needed to change. But we are in our third wave of leadership right now. And studies are showing that change really happened in 2020. And that shift, it was like a light switch in a lot of ways. A lot of change tends to be like slow and gradual over time. And when you look back, you can say, oh, like this was a period of change. But when COVID hit, everybody went home, right? We had to completely rethink the way we work. And it was disruptive to the status quo in a way that I think is hugely beneficial, started very hugely beneficial conversations. But we have to keep doing that. And we have the ability to say, but why? And to make those shifts regularly. The intention of tech is to be disruptive.
Yeah.
Right? We have new problems coming at us all the time and old problems that need to be solved in new ways. The fundamental piece of tech is to be disruptive. So do it.
A great example of that, you know, when you're talking about COVID is the remote work. And so offices are really trying to get people back into bum and seat, everyone working in the same place. But Microsoft just did a study and they actually found that people were more productive. They were producing better work remotely. And so again, and we're going to talk more about data in another live, but it's about what is the data that we're looking at? How are we leveraging data as well, and looking at factual information when we're making decisions, instead of, again, that culture fit is more about doing things the same way. Well, we always were in the office, and this is how we collaborated. It doesn't mean you can't collaborate remotely. It means it's a new skill set that we need to develop.
You just do it differently.
Yeah.
It's not that it's gone, you just do it differently. So let's talk about who benefits, right? Like, why would we want to do this? Who benefits from hiring for culture add versus culture fit, and how?
Yeah. So everyone benefits, in my opinion. I think so it's really, what ways do we benefit? It's the employer benefits, because you are going to be creating an organization with different perspectives, and you're going to have to really flex that DEI muscle to understand all these differences and bring them together. And people love that. People love working in a place where they feel valued, they feel seen. And you're going to, the more different people you bring into the organization deliberately, the more you're going to be calling on specific people to solve specific problems. That is a great way to make people feel recognized and valued. Especially, like, you saw the McKinsey Women at Work study that came out in October. Not a lot has changed there, but one of the main pain points for women is that we feel under-recognized and overworked. And so let's move away from that model. Let's recognize people and give people the work that is tied to their strengths. And I'm not just talking about their skills, but their innate strengths, which are their values in action.
Absolutely. You're right. It benefits everybody, businesses, the employees, the future employees, because the culture add piece is expansive. It's growing. It's forward thinking and moving. So the benefits of it, you'll see them immediately in the retention, people having the purpose-driven work, being able to show up in their fullness. But then it's going to continue its return on investment, because they get to continue to grow, and they get pushed to grow by new people who come into the organization. And so the benefits of it, not only immediate, but long term, you'll be able to reap them as long as you continue to push for it and recognize.
And it means you're walking the talk around DEI. And I think for even from an investor perspective, so it really benefits investors to see that you're walking the talk and you have a DEI commitment, because the future of investment is in that space too. Because if we look at a lot of companies that have not been making it, it's because they don't know how to manage their people. They don't know how to scale properly with people and systems and culture. This is all it's the reason why there's a whole study and a whole body of research in organizational psychology, even before DEI was becoming such a spotlight. Because DEI is just another way of saying, like, leadership. It's really a call to leadership. It's a call to understand your people and not just manage them. We've talked before about what is the difference between a manager and a leader. And this is one of the differences. So really looking at culture, and I think it's a great starting point, especially in the hiring practice, in a more deliberate way, is going to benefit you. And I know we're jumping around because we've talked a lot about the definition of culture fit, but I feel like we need to really talk about culture add. So what is culture add? What, in your words, what would you say it is?
Yeah, so the culture add, in my perspective, it's the thing that I'm going to say is going to sound like it's going against something we said earlier about the skills, but the culture add piece is the soft skills and the perspectives, the thoughts, the actions, the emotional intelligence, those things that the people are bringing into the organization to fill those gaps that maybe aren't there, or to support pieces. Like, you maybe have some people who have those things, but they need extra support. If you have one person on your team who's emotionally intelligent and they're constantly being like, hey, maybe you don't say that way because that was rude, right? If you have one person holding that, they're going to get burnt out. So you may need a couple more people that can hold that skill. The hard skills like the coding, the project scoping, those pieces, those can be taught. So yes, you maybe need some of those skills coming in, but any of that can be taught. It can be expanded on. What are they bringing to the table with their humanness, and how are they adding to the culture from their background? Maybe their education from their school was different, or they're self-taught. That's its own skill that would be hugely beneficial to bring into an organization. Somebody who has the way of thinking that allows them to self-teach, and people who can teach, right? So a lot of teachers trying to pivot into tech. If you can teach a subject, you understand it in a completely different way than if you can just do the thing. And if you have somebody who can do the thing and teach the thing, that's a soft skill that people don't necessarily recognize, and it's not easily measurable or tangible. It's not impossible, but it's not easy. So I think that's why the culture ad thing seems daunting, is like, well, how do I even do that?
Yes. I think what really resonated for me there was mentorship, like really thinking about how culture ad is benefiting your organization from a mentorship perspective, especially because a lot of my clients, so at the director level and above, women are leaving twice as fast as they were in the past. And so we have a very leaky pipeline. And I'm hearing this firsthand from my clients to say that there was a lot of support for me early on in my career. And now I've gotten to this level and I'm mentoring so many people and burning out on top of doing my regular job, and no one is supporting me. And so, that's another way to look at culture ad is like, who are we bringing in that can mentor? Because we're going to get more out of mentoring if the mentors truly understand our struggles. And so if they subscribe to a similar culture as you, you're going to trust them more. You're going to be able to navigate issues in a different light, because some of the advice that is passed down generation to generation, first of all, maintains the status quo of culture. And second of all, it doesn't allow everyone to be authentic. It's about really continuing to sacrifice your authenticity for the sake of fitting in. And that's another big one, because and by the way, guys, if you're listening on the podcast or watching us live, we are going to have a tea table with all of this information summarized in terms of what is culture fit and what is culture ad, because I know we're bouncing around a lot. But one of the big ones that I wanted to touch on is culture fit is answering the question, will they fit in? And to quote one of my favorites, Brene Brown, fitting in is the opposite of belonging. And so when we're talking about DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and we really want people to thrive and be authentic at work, and because not because they're going to be happier and you're going to retain them and they're going to be more engaged and productive, but also because that just benefits the organization, because they're allowed to be themselves. They're not afraid to make mistakes. They're not afraid to show up and challenge people. Right? Like even the best leaders need to be challenged sometimes. So culture fit is about fitting in. Culture ad is about belonging. It's about valuing the differences and saying, you know what, they might not fit in to where the organization is now, but we are going to make sure that they're included and valued and seen and understood.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that differentiation of fitting in, assimilation, and belonging, the expansiveness of what belonging and showing up authentically actually looks like.
Yeah, because the other difference is culture fit is creating the homogeneous model, as we said before, and then culture ad is about diversity.
Right. They look like me, they think like me.
Values. Yeah. Still holding those core values, but within a diverse workforce.
Well, and I think it's being value focused versus bias focused, right? Is a really aggressive way of saying that, because if you're looking for culture fit, like you are just looking through your lens of bias, because you're just looking for somebody who looks, sounds, feels like that gut, that very subjective thing that isn't measurable, it isn't quantifiable, where the ad is, okay, here is how it's our organizational values in action. Here's how they are demonstrating this. They're thinking in the values of the company and being able to know what the values are with the company. So the whole, how do you hire for culture ad? That's the next question that everybody's going to want to know. Well, you got to start with knowing what your company values are in the first place.
Yes.
And being very honest about what the company values are.
Yeah. And it may actually, doing this exercise may have you revamp your values, because now you're thinking about it in a different way. You're thinking about your value gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And so just really thinking about, okay, what are the values that are going to be important to our customers, our investors, our employees?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe you do have a different set of internal and external values.
Sure.
So where I've worked, we had like behavioral imperatives that were critical to succeeding and getting to where we needed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But external focus, it's about the value you're adding for your customers. And so really being deliberate about it and strategic and creative. It doesn't need to be, how people have always done it, but just mindful of what it is that what values you're bringing in and what value you want to create.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what value do you want to create is the next step in that, right? What values will you need to hold to accomplish the mission and the vision of the company?
Yeah.
And if you are sitting in a position and you're like, we don't have a culture, like we don't, what does that mean? What does that look like? That's a really good opportunity to dig in, because that tells me that you have some cultures that are running rampant within your company that you
And
may
you do have a culture. Every organization, whether you're deliberate about it or not. And so that's a good way of looking at it is, do you want to be deliberate and create the culture, or do you want the culture to be created on its own? And that could be a problem, because if you're letting other people decide what that is for you, it's really hard to then unlearn a lot of the things that have been ingrained in the organization. But another way of looking at it, because, when you were talking about bias, I really thought about this. Culture fit is about predictability, because that's why we have bias. We want to be able to predict human behavior and outcomes. As humans, we are hardwired for that. So it's not about judging it or being like, okay, we're broken. No, we all have bias. We all gravitate toward predictability. But culture ad is about possibility.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's shifting from predictability to possibility. So think of it that way. And that might be, how does that shift how you're looking at your values, your behaviors, your norms, all of it?
That's bringing up an interesting thought for me too, thinking about the possibilities piece and how much the culture fit and the narratives around it and how we've done it is still very much the assembly line worker mentality of, you do X, you produce Y, and it's very linear, and there's not a whole lot of optionality to move, but that's not how our society is working anymore. That's not how work is anymore. That's not the economy structure that we're currently in anymore. And so bringing in somebody who you're like, oh, well, they have this project experience and they have this industry experience, like that's assembly line thinking. They have new problems they're going to have to be able to solve. So you have to hire for the way they're thinking, the way they're processing, the way they can look at a problem and solve it, regardless of have they solved this exact problem before. That's what culture ad is going to be. They come in with their thoughts and their perspectives, and they can give you something new, because that's what we need right now. We are in a need, we're starving for the new. And that's the only way we're going to solve the problems that are in front of us.
Yeah, especially in the tech industry, because there's so much disruption going on. And so to your point, with the assembly workers, we're moving towards artificial intelligence. And so we really need to get good at knowing people. We really need to get good at that, because we've got all this amazing technology that could be used in so many different ways, but we need to understand people, and we need to be able to design it in a way that people are going to use it and adopt it and change the culture of the world. So the more we have in terms of those values in our organization, those strengths in our organization, the more possibility there will be in that space.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. The constant change piece, I think, is one that can't be talked about enough. And you don't get the opportunity to just rest on laurels anymore. And I know that we want to make all of this easy, right? You're in the hiring process, you're moving quickly. You got to know, like, I need to be able to quickly see, yes, this person fits. No, this person doesn't fit. Yes, it's a good hire. No, it's not a good hire. And that's really, really tempting to say, oh, well, all people out of this boot camp are good at this, so we hire out of that. You're limiting yourself. And I know it takes a little bit more thought and a little bit more effort to really think about, okay, what skills do we need? What thought kind do we need? What gaps do we have?
Yeah.
And then how do we find them, or how do we communicate that we need that? And it pushes people to grow as communicators, as thinkers, as process creators. And you do have a process. You do want to create that. But the other point is, you don't one and done, right? You have the process, you apply it, you come back and evaluate, is it working? Is it getting us what we needed and wanted for our company? Does it need to adjust?
Yeah. And so I wanted to also point out a common trap when it comes to culture. And so we've talked about this, really looking at brand, right? Because a lot of companies want their employees to also be brand ambassadors, because they're showing up to work, they're representing, in their eyes, they're representing the company outside of work too. But this can be a real slippery slope. So we use the example of, I don't know if I want to say the name, but a grocery company who is all about health, right? And saying, we're not hiring people who smoke, for example. And so, I kind of was looking at that critically and saying, I can see that. I know that here in Canada, the Canadian Cancer Society, wants all of their staff to not smoke. It's a leading cause of cancer. I totally get that. But also kind of looking at it from a DEI lens and understanding each demographic of underrepresented, marginalized groups. Because if you really look at it from that lens, who might you be excluding? And because, like, in the Indigenous community, for example, tobacco has been a very ceremonial thing. Like, I can't really speak to all of the cultural significance of that, but that is a culturally significant part of Indigenous culture in North America. And so are we saying that now, as a grocery chain, we are not hiring Indigenous people that smoke? And so that's where I'm saying it's a slippery slope. And so be really careful where you're making these blanket statements to say you can't do all of these things outside of work. For sure, on company property, that can be a rule. But health has been sort of capitalized on, and I know we're on LinkedIn, so I don't want to really say anything that is too controversial, but in that sort of wellness to white supremacy model, there's a lot of kind of rigid thinking around health, and I'm not saying like, okay, yeah, this, we're not debating what's healthy, what's not healthy, but it is also about looking at your brand inclusively and saying people achieve health in different ways. And so, yeah, you can't just make a blanket statement. Like, obviously, if you're a chain smoker, that may not be good for your health, but how are we also embracing culture within that? How are we also looking at the nuances of how white supremacy has been brought into that, how misogyny has been brought into that, the beauty standards, et cetera? There's just so much nuance. And so it's really about, when you're making those decisions, to kind of ask the critical questions and include people from all of the marginalized groups. If we're looking at people with disabilities, and if they're, there's a certain type of something that they're smoking that is helping them with pain management.
Mhm.
So it's really about looking at all of those groups to say, where might we have blind spots?
Mhm. I think it's the pushing on that, right? The critical thinking of challenging the norms, challenging the status quo. Just because something has always been done or something is typically done does not mean it's right, does not mean it's good, does not mean it's helpful.
Mhm.
And so just taking a moment to say, hey, let's tear down the Lego house. Like, let's just take it all apart and see what's here. And if you put it back together in the same way, okay. But at least you did it mindfully and aware of what you were doing.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so it's not even a conversation of what values you should or you shouldn't have as a company or what your culture should or shouldn't be. It's really about evaluating what culture do you have? Is
Yeah.
it serving you? And do you want to make any changes? Right?
Yeah.
You created the culture in the first place. You can create it again. You can change it. The power is in the questions and the critical thinking and supporting people to be a part of that process.
Totally, totally. It's about expanding to think more inclusively and those open-ended questions that, us coaches love to ask.
Mhm.
The tough questions, but also the questions that are going to make it easier for you to manage your employees and not manage, lead your employees. And it's going to make it easier for you to not have to do just that, micromanage. And
Mhm.
it's allowing them to kind of run with the values in their own ways and see what can be created from that.
Mhm.
So you might have a rigid version of even your brand. And then when you empower your employees to be brand ambassadors
Mhm.
and you see that product being used in different ways, it's
Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing. And to really just reward and recognize people for thinking of those. So it's really looking at the reward system as well.
Yeah.
That is how are you rewarding culture add?
Yeah. For sure.
Not just hiring for it, but rewarding it in the business.
Which, back to, how do you hire for it, right? That's the major thing we help people with, is hiring diverse talent that in companies they can thrive in. So other pieces of what you can do to hire for the culture ed, once you are aware of what your culture is, what it is that you're looking for, really thinking about, okay, how would we know if we saw it? Having a standard process of evaluation that is objective, making sure that if you have your evaluation, you have your scorecard, you have the standardized interview questions. Are your interview questions based around the values and how people think versus what do you do for fun? Tell me about yourself. Like, let's ask some more concrete questions that get objective answers back that you can actually compare and contrast people against one another. Making sure that it's measurable is super, super important, and you're using the same standards across the board.
And make sure that measure is not yes or a no. It's
Right.
not a do they fit the culture,
Mhm.
right? Again, not do they fit in, but in what ways is
Mhm.
this person adding value?
Right.
In what ways is this person adding value beyond the base skills for this job?
Mhm.
And how do these values align to the company's values?
Mhm.
In what ways? Because that gets you out of your comfort zone, because like the feelings based is really when we're using our emotional brain, which
Mhm.
is the either or thinking, and
Mhm.
we're moving into a higher level of thinking in our neocortex, saying in what ways, how are we expanding to that possibility? And so moving from predictability to possibility, in what ways are we adding value here?
Mhm. Yeah, the adding value and the quantifying it, and how and in
Mhm.
what ways, right? Those big open-ended questions that allow for expansion of thought and deep conversations with your hiring panel, because you should also have hiring panels whenever possible
Yeah.
that has diversity on them so that you can get multiple influx of opinion about the person who's coming into the company,
Yes.
especially at the smaller startups in which everybody is affecting everybody.
Yeah.
As you get larger, that changes, right? And the team dynamic becomes a little bit different. But in the startup and even that mid range, everybody affects everybody. And every hire is important. And you don't want to just bring people on for the sake of bringing people on, which is also where the referral program kind of gets a little dicey. it can be helpful and growing and getting some good skill in the door, but you have to be careful about how you're hiring from the get-go for that to be effective later.
And you can still use a referral program to hire. And we mentioned this in a previous episode, but it's about really making sure your employees that are referring are educated on DEI, educated on the values, educated on the type of people that you want to bring in. And so I'd also add to that hiring scorecard. So it's not just like what is the value that this person is adding, and how does this align to the organization's values, but also how does this address our culture gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's not about just what you have, but what are the gaps, and how are we bringing, similar to how you hire for skill gaps,
Mm-hmm.
as an organization as a whole. So not looking at it from an individual level, but like the macro level of the organization. What are our strengths, and where are our areas of opportunity where we need more strength?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So then in our last 15 minutes that we have, how do you measure the success of a hiring for culture ad?
So this is a tricky one because, we talk about data a lot, and I love data. It starts with data. Yeah. So like, is this employee engaged? Is this employee productive? Is this employee, really getting the results that you were expecting from them? But just because it might not be working out doesn't mean that it wasn't a successful culture ad. It's looking at the data first, but then sitting down one-on-one with people and having real open conversations, getting that qualitative data, that nuanced information of why they might not be thriving. Because if you haven't been focused on culture ad in the past, there are going to be growing pains. There's going to be some work that needs to be done to be really deliberate about making sure that they have a successful onboarding, that they feel included, that you're valuing their differences. And so again, if this is a new skill set, like it is for many people, it's okay that if the first few culture ads but don't wait until they leave the organization. Make sure you're checking in with them at every phase of the process. The hiring process. How is the hiring process going for you? What barriers have you been seeing at this stage? What barriers have you been seeing in your onboarding? Because this is where we want you to be, and this is, where we're seeing you. So what is getting in the way? And so it's really about assessing at each stage, what are the barriers? What is the learning that needs to happen for the individual? What is the support that needs to happen for the individual? And what is the education that needs to happen within the team? Because when we start adding culture, that means that the norms may be shifting. And so I always look back at that model of, when you're forming a team, it goes from form, storm, norm, perform. And so if we're now hiring a bunch of different people from different types of backgrounds, it's going back to the phases deliberately and saying, okay, let's go back to the storm phase a little bit, understand about how this has shifted things. How are we now reevaluating our norms to be more inclusive? And then that's where the perform comes in. And so really it's about, don't wait to assess whether it was successful. Measure success at every single phase. Don't rely on just data to say, oh, they left the company, culture ad didn't work, let's go back to culture fit. Because that is just, it's going to get you back to the same sort of problems with the same homogeneous thinking.
Well, and I think the other piece of that too is, measure along the way, know what you're measuring for, but what is your goal, right? You have to have a goal for what you want to see. Like, how would you know if the culture ad was successful? How would you know that any initiative was successful? What are you attaching to that definition of success? Is it that you have more equality between your junior and senior levels? Right? We see a lot of women and people of color who are in the junior roles, but there's a huge gap when you start to get to the senior roles. So is it closing that gap and creating more equity there? Is it retention? Would you like to increase your retention by 15, 20%? Figuring out what it is that you need so that you then know what you're measuring to make that successful, and then adjusting the process along the way. Like you said, it may have been a great culture ad, but there's some other piece of the process that's standing in the way. A prime example, I was hired at a company because I'm process oriented. I ask a lot of questions, very inquisitive, and I personally like to tear things down and then build them back up. And the company wanted that in thought, but in action, I was hit with roadblocks every step of the way. The company wasn't actually ready for the culture ad that I was bringing. And so, is that a problem that you're facing? Did somebody come in ready to go, super excited and engaged?
Yeah.
But then the company norms have shut them down and caused them to disengage.
Yeah.
So, really digging into why.
Yeah.
Why is this not working? Why are they not meeting it? And from curiosity, not because, oh, bad, you're not doing it, but what's going on here? What can we fix? What can we help? What can we support?
Yeah. And going back to your point, that's why it has to be a top-down approach. So if you are a DEI practitioner, if you are a recruiter, if you're an HR person watching this, or a hiring manager who is not at the top level, you need to bring them in, show them this podcast, get them on board, really get them their buy-in first, and be strategic about it and how deliberate about it. And so, and also the things we're measuring, because, I mentioned engagement, retention, all the things that organizations are usually paying attention to anyways, but sitting down with someone like Alexandria or myself to develop employee survey questions with more specifics around how are we going to know? How are we going to measure? Do I feel valued? Do I feel recognized? All these kind of important indicators that are going to measure the benefit of culture ad from, and maybe even looking scientifically in the organizational psychology research at what are those indicators that are most predictive of this, but also tying it to the company's values and where you need to go. Because again, this is what we're trying to do when we're disrupting. It's not just about DEI as a check in the box exercise. We are integrating this into the business because DEI is also good for your business. It is good for your business. It's about the ways that you're changing your thinking. Because if you think about it, if we're shifting from predictability to possibility, this is a great way to get in and do this, and also have everyone from the top level of the organization down buy into this, because it's about them. It's about the people.
Yeah. Being that human first, right? And focusing in on the people that show up every day, because that's what your business is, right? It's the humans that run it for you, and you have to support them and engage with them and be able to meet them where they are and create places in which humans can thrive as humans. We're not computers, much to many people's chagrin, I suppose.
Yeah. And we're trying to like automate so much, and we're going to this sort of, and I think there's a lot of possibility with AI. I'm very open and optimistic, but from what I've seen, because I've gone through webinars with scientists who are looking at, even in the coaching space, implementing AI. And I've looked at how AI, is being used for, writing resumes and cover letters and that kind of thing. And we're not there yet. And why aren't we there yet? Because we're not capitalizing on the nuances, on the culture. We're not capitalizing on the culture. And so I think, especially if you're in a business where you're trying to bring in AI, or maybe that is your business, this is so important to look at culture ad as the way that you are going to lead in this space.
100%. And we are going to dig more into bias in, bias out, how bias data perpetuates harm to diversity, equity, and inclusion. That'll be a topic that we talk about next month. We are going to have Gabe back. I'm super excited for that. But next week, we are talking from the employee perspective. How do you find a company culture that's good for you, that you can thrive in, and knowing what your own values are? So join us for that. Even if you are in the hiring side of things, that can be an important thing to think about for yourself. What are your own values, and how do you know if you're in a culture that you're thriving in, and how can you catch that? So join us next week for that. The DEI checklist is still available. So if you are interested in digging into where do I start with this journey? Where am I at? And getting that baseline, go ahead and comment checklist, and we will get you the link of where you can download that. And if you are a company who is looking at your diversity, equity, and inclusion for the year and you would like an evaluation, reach out to Jasleen and I. We are offering free evaluations for companies right now. So let us know if we can help and support you. Do you have any other thoughts that you want to add, Jasleen?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify the DEI checklist is the one I referred to before, the bias checklist. So it's really comprehensive. It goes through those biases. I think we've linked the implicit bias test in there as well. If not, we will.
We'll do it again. Yeah.
Because I think that's really important, because it's been an eye-opener for me, and I think it's an eye-opener for a lot of people who especially work in the DEI space, to really understand where they're starting from and what their blind spots might be, but also just it opens your mind to kind of how you're operating in your business on a day-to-day. And so again, with this work, it is challenging. And so book that DEI strategy session with us, because we cover a lot of topics on here, but you're not going to be able to do all of them at once. And so in positive psychology, we talk about this scaffolding effect. And so we're really looking, we want to work with you to kind of look at, okay, what are your goals, and why is DEI important to you? And then look at all of the elements of success and focus in on the ones that are going to have the most impact. So whether it's the places where you have the biggest gaps, the places where you need the most alignment in terms of your business objectives, really just, we want to be able to think about it strategically with you, because it can be overwhelming, because there's a lot of work that you have to do as an individual first to kind of implement this. And so using the scaffolding effect to find different ways, different places where you can start to truly move the dial on DEI, because we hear that so much from people, that it's treated as a check in the box exercise, and you're doing so much, but nothing actually is changing. And so that's why we're called the disruptors. We really want to disrupt this space, and we want to change your company. We want to change the world for the better.
Yeah. Sustainable ways for humans to continue to thrive at work, because work isn't going anywhere, tech isn't going anywhere, and we are going to remain human. So let's do
that.
This.
We are, hopefully. I don't know, maybe way to like be bionic humans, but I think I like being human. And so we want people to be human in the most authentic ways and be their whole selves at work and really thrive.
Absolutely. 100%. Share this page with anybody that you think would benefit from it. If you like podcasts over the live version, you can find us on Spotify or on Apple Podcast. There is an RSS feed through Anchor if that is of interest as well. And we look forward to seeing y'all next week. I hope you have.
We'll post the links to the podcast in the comments here on LinkedIn Live. If you're listening to us on the podcast, make sure to click the subscribe button.
Yes.
So that you are notified when there's a new episode.
Yes, absolutely. All right. Thanks, y'all. It has been a delightful conversation, and we will see you all next week.